Yo, what is up, guys? Snap here. Today we're going to be talking about all of the not 3.26 legacy of Phrecia builds here. First, we're going to go over all of the end game variants of the build so you kind of have like a goal of what you're looking for to transition into early end game mapping. We're going to go over leveling variants of all these builds and progression suggestions, all of that. So quite a long one here today, so let's jump right into it. First off, the team composition we've settled on is going to be a Behemoth Carry, a Paladin support, a Paladin Crybot, an Architect Gluttony support, an Ancestral Commander Culler, and then a Wild Speaker Druggery Miner support. So let's start off with the Behemoth Carry that we've chosen here. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend watching this video real quick on the armor stacker. It is very relevant. The only thing that's really swapping here is going to be the Ascendancy. So the new Ascendancy here, Behemoth, you know anything about armor stacking, the node we care about here is going to be Steel Willed, which gives us 2% attack damage per uncapped 450 armor. This node is frankly just crazy and kind of just says double damage for an armor stacker, of course. And then on top of that, you're going to be getting some max rage, some rampage, does a little bit for your attack speed and your movement speed, that kind of thing. But this node alone, Steel Willed, makes the Ascendancy worth playing. Big downside to Behemoth, of course, is you have to turn off all of your spells. This is a very, very big downside in smaller groups and of course for solo, but if you're in 6-man, you can overcome all of those hurdles that you have because you can mark with supports. You don't really need curses, this kind of thing. All of the downsides can be mitigated. So we have an early endgame config here, and we have to turn off all of our spells, which means we have to turn off Blood Rage, we have to turn off Berserk, and we have to turn off Pet Blood. Those are the three main things that this build is kind of losing that can't be made up from other supports. So Pet Blood is a little bit of EHP loss, but you can replace it with Progenesis later when you get a little bit more budget. And then of course, losing Berserk is a little bit of a damage decrease. Not that this build really needed more damage anyways, it's 738 billion on an early endgame config. And then of course, losing Blood Rage is losing attack speed, which is losing a little bit of frenzy charge generation, but you have pretty consistent frenzy charge generation otherwise, and the attack speed's kind of whatever, so Behemoth's Ascendancy works out very good for us here. Everything else on this Ascendancy is kind of the exact same from my previous armor stacker video. You're just swapping to Behemoth and it just gives you double damage, and then you have access to a lot of Forbidden Flame and Fleshes on Berserker that are viable here. There are a ton of these jewels that are really good, Blitz being one of them. Fall of Savagery is viable, Aspect of Carnage is good, Crave the Slaughter is good for all the attack speed you're getting, Rite of Ruin is good of course for the rage effect, and then of course Unbreakable is also a solid notable as well. So you have a pick of like maybe 6 or 7 jewels that are really good here on Forbidden Flesh and Flame. Additionally, because you're not reserving anything on mana, you can actually just click Blood Magic here for 10% more life. This build is level 90. You can click more life nodes and bump yourself up to like 4,500 before any Aurabot, you know, life or anything like that. I think it's going to be pretty comfortable, but you might need to cut damage a little bit here and grab some more life on the trade depending on how crazy you're rolling your maps and how good your other party defenses are. So just keep in mind that you can click more life nodes if you need a little bit more EHP. But if you're really having struggles dying in T17 Pandemonium or Exile maps, really the upgrade you're going to be looking for is just going to be Progenesis, because that's going to be giving you all of your EHP here. That's enough about the carry. Once again, if you don't know how the armor stacker works, I would just refer you to my previous video. It explains much more in depth about all the interactions and stuff on the armor stacker, but these are the updates as a result of the new Ascendancies. Next up, we're going to move on to the Paladin support here. Now, I don't believe I have talked about a bunch of the changes that we have made to an Aurabot for supporting an armor stacker. Originally, I was supposed to be going an Architect support in 6-man because I think it was very slightly better than the Paladin Aurabot because I didn't really want to be linking. But for some reason, Mark himself decided to go on to Paladin and add 5% aura effect on the small nodes, which means that if you're in 6-man, you can get up to 75 aura effect on one Ascendancy, which is honestly just like a little too broken to pass up, right? So I had all of this Templar leveling and progression planned, but it's honestly all just useless because Paladin is just way too broken not to play. So looking at the Paladin here and the end game tree, of course, you're going to come out of the start here. You're going to go bottom right for this cluster. This gives you access to Iron Reflexes and some block nodes here, which is important for Aegis, which is your main defensive layer. You grab the aura node here, you path up, path to the aura node over here, path to the aura node over here, path to the aura node over here, and the last one in the corner here. You have 2 larges in here with 25% jewels. This is enough to fit in all of your auras. And then one of the main things you're doing here is putting your Elegant Hubris either in this socket, you can put it in this socket works too, and then also this socket. Just make sure you're not deleting any important nodes with the Elegant Hubris. You can look for 2 or 3 notables depending on your budget. 2 notables are going to be very doable. 24 aura effect, you can get them for very cheap. You then have a large Thread of Hope here. This one's very efficient for saving points, so you can click Glancing Blows. The block is very important because this character's main defense and recovery layer is of course Aegis. When you're building an armor armor stacker, your Aurabot is naturally going to be juicing Grace and Determination. As a byproduct of that, your Aurabot is going to be sitting on 800,000 armor. And so, you know, when you block, you're recovering like 10,000, maybe even like 15,000 ES every single time you block. So Aegis is a little broken here, right? So it's really tough to put on anything else. In order to get block cap on your main defensive layer, which is Aegis here, you have to click the node wheel here at the bottom, grab the spell block mastery here. You take glancing blows, of course, here. Make sure to prioritize Riot Queller and or veteran defenses here. This helps a lot with your attributes, and then also getting some block chance here is very, very convenient. Then you have enough extra mana to reserve Tempest Shield. This gives you rest of the spell block. It's very easy to cap out with glancing blows here. As for the Ascendancy itself, you are just clicking Absolution for 40% aura effect, and then you're clicking 7 small nodes, which are located 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for a total of 35 aura effect. You do not click any other notables here on the Ascendancy because the aura effect is just too good in 6-man. Basically, your Ascendancy reads 75% aura effect, and 40 of that requires you to be linked. This normally presents a problem in 6-man because the Aurabot really doesn't want to be doing the linking in 6-man, right? Generally, that job is relegated over to the Mana Guardian, and then he's soul linking. However, we don't have a Mana Guardian, nobody else is linking, so you can basically use the Absolution for that 40 aura effect, but you do have to make the extra effort to include a link on this Aurabot, which is generally a bit of a squeeze. Linking on this Aurabot actually creates a substantial problem that needs solving. One of the best ways to get Grace levels on an armor stacker is to get gem levels and of course aura effect. Best way to get gem levels is to put a Grace gem inside of March of the Legion. March of the Legion can actually double link blessings with Guardian's Blessing and Divine Blessing over to Grace. This allows you to have a super juiced level 33 Grace with about 56 aura effect from the Guardian's Blessing and like another 50% from the Divine Blessing. They both work and both stack. This gives your Grace something like a 6x multiplier, which is where the armor stacker is getting all of his armor. But in order to use this, both of the conditions for Divine Blessing and Guardian's Blessing need to be met. The first condition is that you have an active minion, and the second condition is that you have enough mana to cast Divine Blessing. The common way people have enough mana to cast Divine Blessing is, of course, to use Soulcatcher with Lavianjas. Soulcatcher makes it so you can't recover mana, and then use a Lavianjas to make it so your blessing costs no mana. So great, you have a super juiced Grace gem as a result of all of that. However, as I said before, links are very necessary to obtain 40% aura effect from the Ascendancy. But here is the problem. How do you link when you're unable to recover mana from Soulcatcher? Links have an ongoing persistent cost here of, 22 per person you link, and if you're pushing Soulcatcher in order to enable your Divine Blessing, there's a serious problem here. Because when the Soulcatcher's up, you're not regenning mana, which means you're not linking, which means you're not getting 40 aura effect. I explored a lot of ways to try and get the mana cost low enough and or to have 100% uptime on Lavianjas, but that playstyle is just going to be way too clunky and unviable in my opinion, and the amount of stuff you have to drop to get enough reduced cost to make the link work with just reduced cost on gear is also not a really viable pathway. The best solution in my opinion to be able to turn on links and to have a Divine Blessing with Lavianjas and Soulcatcher is to just invest in a lot of duration on the tree so that your blessing lasts a super long time, which is 30 seconds here. This does, however, mean that there will be baked in downtime to your link when the Soulcatcher is up. So the way that this works is you're going to be casting your blessing when you hit Soulcatcher Lavianjas. The Lavianjas is going to last for 3 seconds, which means you have 2.7 seconds of downtime on this Soulcatcher. Once the Soulcatcher drops, you will be able to link again, receiving those 40 aura effect from the Ascendancy. So there's about 2.7 seconds of downtime every 30 seconds, but it's only for the 40 aura effect, and that, in my opinion, is going to be the best trade-off here. It just costs way too much investment into reduced mana costs to get the link to work, and of course, you don't want to drop gem levels or aura effect on the aura that's giving you the most damage, which is Grace. So this is the best solution to have everything fit together, in my opinion. The downside is you just have a tiny bit of downtime on a measly 40 aura effect every 30 seconds. And that's the reason why we have so much duration investment on the tree, as well as the mastery here. Going over the gear quickly, Dark Seer on an endgame Aurabot is very necessary because you do need purities at level 23, and it's pretty hard to get +2 from a lot of sources on like Helmet and stuff. So I think Dark Seer with the global +2, it helps your Grace. It also helps hit your purity breakpoints 23. It's just a very necessary item. It's very good. If you're trying to be cheap, you can get a life mana Dark Seer, but the ES mana Dark Seer is obviously better. Aegis, as I said, main recovery, main defensive layer. This is irreplaceable irreplaceable. On Svalin versus Aegis, I think if you're building an armor stacker, you're going to have a ton of armor on your Aurabot anyways. You're a duelist, you're in the vicinity, just click Iron Reflexes, and I do think Aegis Aurora is just overall a better pick than Svalin. You want to try to obtain a 15% Aura helmet. This isn't strictly necessary to be like a top tier base. You can even get like armor ES hybrids. If you're looking for just a little bit of ES, you'd be happy with like 100 or 200 or something like that, but the Lich's Circlet is the best one you can buy. As for the body armor here, we are not going for a double elevated body armor this time around. We are looking to recombinate a body armor. If you're unaware, recombinators are just really broken, and you can make very, very good non-influenced items with like perfect affixes. If you are unaware about how recombinators work, I would specifically recommend this guide by Doth, which I'll link in the description here. He has a basically step-by-step process of how you make these chest pieces and or other ES gear. And basically this is going to be the closest thing that you can kind of follow along and learn about how to make this kind of a chest piece. So I'll leave this in the description for the people who don't know how to recombinate, but just know that this chest piece, very doable. You just have to recombinate a little bit, but it's very, very easy to make here. Moving on to the glove slots, you have a lot of options here. You can get an ES pair of gloves. You can get Hands of the High Templar. There's a lot of options for gloves here. I personally am going with Breast Dealer because 1, it's super cheap, and 2, it helps me anoint more aura effect. I don't necessarily need the defenses on an Aurabot like this with all of the massive ES you're gaining on block, and it has a ton of PDR because it does have 800,000 armor. So I think Breast Dealer anointing a extra notable here is going to make your Timeless Jewel cheaper to buy, which is very important. You don't want to be spending like 30, 40, 50 div on a GG Timeless Jewel when you could just, you know, when you're early on, buy a Breast Dealer, anoint another 12% notable. It makes your jewel buying process cheaper. March of the Legion, try to get a +2 AoE or aura corruption here. Of course, you can just use a +5, but this is going to be your main juicer of Grace, which of course is important because we're all playing armor stacker carries. Jinx Juju, try to get a Grace Corrupt. It's not necessary for you to have a perfect explicit aura effect, but you're just looking to get a Grace Corrupt here. If you can, anoint Champion of the Cause. As for the rings, you're going to try to just get Grace effect rings at 20%, and then just try to get as many stats as you can. Generally, attributes and ES is preferred, so this is what you're looking out for. You can buy any ring. You can recombinate these if you get a aura effect base and then try to recombinate attributes and or intelligence and or mana and ES onto it, or you can just live search all Grace effect rings. Tons of these pop up throughout the league. They're very easy to buy. As for the belt, String of Servitude with Grace effect is irreplaceable. This is just the best belt. There really is no replacement. Last, Lavianja Soulcatcher to enable the blessing. You have a Quicksilver, so you're not a slug, and then you have Sorrow of the Divine for the Druggery support, giving yourself a ton of ES recovery here. It's around 20,000. Last but not least, a Jade Flask so that you can give yourself tons of armor here, which is of course synergizing with your Aegis. Last but not least, you can talk about Forbidden Flesh and Flame. The best Forbidden Flesh and Flame is going to be inspirational, but I expect this to be really pricey. Just know you have some other options on Champion. You can maybe take Fortify. That's super good. You can take 50% block to help attack block cap you a little bit easier, or you can take the Lucky Block here. There's tons of options that are pretty good on Champion and Gladiator. Last but not least, I see this question asked a lot. Why do you have Portal Mines equipped? If you're unaware, Portal Mines are a debuff given by High Impact Mine, which makes it so enemies around your High Impact Mines or Portal Mines are going to be taking double damage. This is super easy to cap out because you're an Aurabot. You have a ton of aura effect, and this does scale the mine aura. And the reason you use Portal is because it has 0 mana cost, which means you can throw it for free and it doesn't affect your reservation at all. All right, that should summarize most of the changes from Aurabot over here to the Paladin swap. We're going to move on to the Crybot here. I did make an update to the Crybot here in a video a couple days ago, so I would start here if you're unfamiliar with some of the stuff that the Crybot is doing here. The Crybot is also going to be a Paladin here. The main reason is for Bring the Battle, where war cries have infinite power. This lets you obtain your shield slot back, which is important for Vengeful Cry. Vengeful Cry gives you a ton of max rage, which is honestly just really broken. And in order to proc it, you have to press Forbidden Right, which means you need a ton of energy shield so that you're taking a big enough savage hit in order to proc it. Getting your energy shield slot here for a big ES shield lets you get enough ES to make the Forbidden Right be able to proc Vengeful Cry. It's very important. So getting your shield slot back from the Ascendancy is very, very good. And then of course, they take more damage when you war cry them. Nearby enemies take 25% increased elemental damage. These nodes are not wasted. They're very, very good on the Crybot. Your last node is a bit of a choice. I think you can take Elemental Valiance if you just like wanted a little bit of extra flat, I guess. You can take the Consecrated Ground if you wanted some more regen on the 6-man Crybot, or you can take yourself like a level 30 discipline because you are running your own discipline. This will probably give you a little bit more personal ES. All of these are viable options, but I don't think it matters one way or the other. Pathing here is going to be identical to the previous Crybot because Paladin just happens to be a duelist. No changes are necessary here. You basically path to all the Warcry stuff. You grab a brute force solutions here to solve your massive intelligence problems. You get a timeless jewel here to get as much Warcry buff effect as possible on these notables that you're taking in this area. You tattoo off as much of the strength for Warcry CDR as you can, and then a little bit of investment in duration on the tree. Rest of it is just life nodes. It's pretty straightforward. As I mentioned before, the one thing you really want to watch out for on the Crybot is watching your ES to life ratio because you want to be able to proc Forbidden Right. Once again, I would refer back to this video if you want to learn how to calculate savage hits for Vengeful Cry. Gearing here is going to be basically the same as before. You want to get ES pieces with life on it because you want life and ES. You want to get Warcry buff effect on the helmet if possible. Rest of it's just going to be percent ES and res wherever you need it. We have opted to drop Temp Chain's Curse, and then you just go for Death's Door to get +1 max endurance charge. We don't really need the Temp Chains here, and so you're just basically turning on Enfeeble, and you're just running around with Death's Door for the +1 max endurance, which you're of course sharing to all of your teammates with Ambush Charge. Pretty cookie cutter stuff here for 6-man Crybot. Not a whole lot has changed, especially since my last video a few days ago. So let's move on quickly to the Gluttony supports. Gluttony character has had some adaptations since the last video I made about it a few days ago. I have filled out all of these sockets here with all of the stuff I think you need to run, but the main thing to point out here is going to be the Forbidden Flesh on Templar here that gives you recovery rate to life mana and energy shield. This isn't a very popular Forbidden Flesh and Flame, but there might be limited availability of these in the event league. But if you can get your hands on one of these, I do think it's worth it to jam some garbage auras like Vitality, Clarity, Purity, and Anger on this character because the Aurabot is not running these auras. That means they're not being overridden with a higher aura effect. This means you can get some extra recovery rate, which is very welcome. It's 7% across 5 auras, which is 35% increased recovery rate, which, you know, it's not an Aurabot recovery, but it's something a little extra and it goes a long way, especially with a Druggery support. Other than that, nothing has really changed from this character. The main objective remains the same. You can toss mines to cap out Stormblast, and you have 100% uptime on Gluttony. Then you just need the rest for personal defenses. Very, very clear objective here. Once again, I made a specific video about this build. I would start here if you're unfamiliar with what the Gluttonybot is doing. Anyways, we're going to be moving on to the Culler here because there are a few interesting changes here. Now, first off, let's talk about the Ascendancy. Before, Cullers would go Pathfinder, and the sole reason for that would be 1, you can Life Flask Abuse for a ton of recovery, and 2, you just click a bunch of Flask Effect, which equates to rarity. Now, the Gambler here does have rarity of items found on the small nodes, which could be enticing, but this would only equate to like 35, maybe 40 rarity on a build that already has 1300 rarity. In my opinion, sacking the whole Ascendancy just for that isn't really worth it when there's something a lot more enticing. That, of course, is going to be Ancestral Commander with our Culler because of the node Born Under Fire. You know anything about endgame PoE, Fizz taken as is just a premium stat, and Fizz mitigation is one of the best things in the entire game. We want this somewhere on somebody in the party, and I think the Culler is like the best way to get it, and so we're sacking a little bit of rarity, 35, maybe 40, and then we're grabbing 50% Fizz taken as. This also helps his defenses because he paths over to the Defiance of Destiny node to grant 15% unreserved life healed before you get hit. This is a very, very good node, very good for survivability, especially in T17s. Your last point can kind of be whatever, but I do think that the Jug node here, the action speed cannot be modified below base value, feels very good, so I would probably just click this on the Culler. This does mean that our Culler is now a Marauder, so we just have to adjust the pathing a little bit here to come out of the Marauder side. It's not a huge switch up here, and then of course we just unspec the Ranger start that was there before. Now, the Culler has adapted a lot from the 325 version of the Culler. I can go over some of the main changes here. So old Cullers in like 323 and 324 had to path to a bunch of jewel sockets to fit in rarity jewels. However, all of those have been removed. So there is nothing on the tree that is really going to be contributing to your rarity besides a little bit of Flask Effect, which I've managed to grab here. But then you have like 100 points left over to just grab whatever. So personal defenses are the name of the game here. You can fit in a ton on a single character, including 70% block, 58% spell block, basically cap suppression here, right around 4k life, but it's hardcore gonna crutch on Progenesis and or Pet Blood to manage its hit pool. Most of the tree is super straightforward. You're just grabbing res, life, suppression, block. It's very, very straightforward here. As for the gearing, we have Eclipse Solaris because we want to cull with a wand. This blinds nearby enemies. It does something. It's better than just like any random white wand. We have the Stormsail Best, a rarity unique here. We have a synthesized helmet with rarity to slain rare and unique enemies. Greed's Embrace, irreplaceable. Orsi's irreplaceable. Wonder Trap is good here, and we go low life by reserving Pet Blood on Arrogance. You can do Pet Blood or Tempest Shield here. You reserve it here, and it reserves exactly 54% of your life. You take the Life Mastery here to count as low life when you're below 55%, which means you're perfectly at the 55% here, no wasted life. This lets you have the 100 rarity from the boots. You're looking for Kalandra jewelry with whatever downsides don't suck, so, you know, rarity with minus attributes maybe, or res, or whatever you can handle. Minus damage mods are also very good affixes here, but as much rarity as you can find here. As for flasks, we have a distillate gold flask per Genesis if you can afford it, and then a life flask to give yourself a bunch of recovery, of course. Last but not least, we need to talk about Battle Within. Battle Within is generally something that we considered early on to be a little bit hard to turn on. However, the way that this works is, by default, this tincture only works with your melee weapon. So in order to be building stacks, you have to be attacking with some sort of melee attack. You only need 20 stacks in order to be at the max effectiveness of this tincture. So a way you can proc this is to weapon swap to a melee weapon. It can be whatever. We've chosen Ephemeral Edges. You then have teammates warp into the map with 2 writhing jars, which spawn exactly 20 worms. The Culler then kills all of these with any skill. You can choose Ice Crash. You can choose whatever skill you want. This will immediately put you at the 20 stacks necessary to cap out this tincture. You can then, after doing that, weapon swap back to your ranged weapon, which is a wand, Eclipse Solaris, and clear the map as normal while maintaining those 20 stacks for the rest of the map. You will not build any additional stacks because the tincture only works with melee weapons, but interestingly, the rarity stat is global and works for any weapon as long as you have the required amount of stacks. So with all of that together, we can see our rarity is sitting at 1237 with everything up, including the tincture, which is why dropping 35 rarity on the Ascendancy for the Fizz taken as doesn't feel so bad. Losing 35 rarity on 1237 I think is acceptable. As for links on the Culler, I think KB is probably your best culling skill here. GMP culling, fork return feels pretty good, and then of course rarity and links. You have to drop something here because you don't have a 6 link. You're probably just dropping returning proj and run the other 5 here. KB does feel pretty good in indoor layouts. Rest of the stuff here is just going to be personal defense auras, and then of course you need a movement skill. You can use Frostblink, Shield Charge, Flame Dash, whatever your movement skill of choice is. You do have sockets for an Animate Guardian here. They are in the item gear here. You can look at all of the items of what you should put on your AG. And then last but not least, your Raise Spectre here is going to be Host Chieftains. This is our consistent source of power charges. However, an alternative, if your Culler is marking on hit with Assassin's Mark, that means you have a source of power charge generation for the party, and that means you can probably rotate some of these Host Chieftains over to Pain Artists, which give you crit multi. Just a little bit of a min-max thing, but those might be dying in T17s. You might be just dissuaded from summoning those because they can get a little bit pricey if you have to keep resummoning them over and over. If you're unaware, Pain Artists give everybody 30 crit multi, so it does help a little bit for damage. Anyways, that's most of the changes for the Culler. We are now going to move on to the Druggery support. We are planning on playing Druggery support, even though Alt Ascendancy don't exist, and we have one build enabling jewel that is mandatory for you to buy for this build to work, and that is going to be Master Surgeon. The Druggery character is very important in this team comp because it enables Sap of the Seasons, which is our main source of penetration. As you can see here, if we turn off Sap of the Seasons, we lose 71% of all of our damage. This is enabled by the recovery from the Druggery, so it is very, very important to get this enabled. Once again, I made a dedicated video about this particular build, all of the ins and outs a little more in depth. I would point you over to this video about the Druggery Miner if you're unfamiliar with how this support works, because it is a little bit new in group play. As for the Ascendancy, it's pretty open here. It just has to be a Ranger, of course, because we're planning on spending whatever it takes to buy these Master Surgeon jewels to enable the Druggery. Wild Speaker's probably the best choice here. You're going to click Charge, Share, and Tailwind. You're going to give yourself full suppression here for free. You can convert this all to spell dodge pretty quickly. And then from here, you're probably taking the aspect of the Avian and then the aspect of the Avian buff effect. We do have a source of double damage already, and this does give you movement speed on the other half. So it's really just like 50% uptime on some movement speed, which could feel good, I guess. So that's what we're clicking. The other Ascendant series here kind of suck. They don't do very much. We also don't want to spawn shrines that like give us skeletons. It's just like, like, there's nothing to click here really, but you have to be a ranger, so Wild Speaker it is. We get some Tailwind, sure. Nothing here has changed from the previous iteration of the Druggery Miner. Once again, you path to all of the life recovery from Flask. You grab personal defenses to try and give yourself Eternal Youth to fix your recovery issue. You then grab a little bit of Aura Effect on the tree and some Mine Effect over here to help cap out your Pyroclast mines. So altogether, this build is giving us 21,552 recovery per second. You can make this also go to ES with Sorrow of the Divine, of course, which is basically doubling your recovery layer. And then the cherry on top is the close to 5,000 fire damage that this character provides. Very, very broken, very good support build here. Last thing I want to touch on here of the 6-man builds is there is a alternate carry that you can use, which is going to be Rage Vortex of Berserking. It's basically the exact same build as the Lightning Strike character, but we have modified a few nodes over here which go into projectile speed and stuff like that, and we have modified it over here to just generic AoE. And the Rage Vortex of Berserking just has a really massive quality of life because you can turn it on and just run around. This is what Rage Vortex of Berserking looks like with like really good AoE investment and stuff like that. It's just a constant cyclone that's just blowing up the screen. The quality of life potential here is really good, so if you have enough damage and you can afford to make it actually kill T17 maps, then this is going to be like a better quality of life version of the Behemoth that you can run. It does, however, do like maybe 1/10 of the damage of Lightning Strike, but if you got the damage, you can play this build because it's probably higher quality of life. I'll link this POB in here if anybody's interested. It's just an alternate carry for the 6-man. Well, that's it about all the 6-man builds. We need to quickly talk about all of the 3-man builds. I know there's a lot of duos and trios and that kind of thing. You guys are constantly asking for, you know, variants of these builds that work in 2-man and 3-man. So I've gone ahead and I've fleshed out actually a duo, carry and Aurabot build, and then also a trio that adds on a Crybot hybrid. So first up, the carry of choice in 3-man is not going to be Behemoth. For duos and trios, the best carry, in my opinion, of course, is going to be Surfcaster. It has way better progression than Behemoth, and it can't be carried because it needs to do the carrying early on in the campaign and progression. And 2, some of the downsides of Behemoth are really difficult to get over if you're in a 2 or 3-man. Mainly, you don't have as many defenses, so dropping stuff like Pet Blood is kinda dangerous for the carry. Additionally, Mark on Hit cannot be used, which means that it's really hard to mark stuff. It's really inconvenient. And nobody else is doing the hitting like a Culler, so basically like dropping these kind of spells and stuff on Behemoth is just like kind of a too big of a downside, and the progression is going to be way too dog shit, so I'm recommending you guys go Surfcaster, Armor Stacker. Surfcaster has a lot going for it, so let's first quickly look at all of the ascendancies we're taking. We have Stormy Seas here for the lightning to cold. This is very good because cold damage can freeze. It also makes it so all of your damage can shock. So all of the damage you're getting from Smite and Wrath is going to go to cold damage, which means you're freezing, which is a big defensive layer. This node is on Warden. The freeze nodes is just like really crazy on that ascendancy. It's going to be the exact same thing here. That is the Brine-bound nodes, which lets you freeze stuff for a minimum of 1 second. This node is just crazy. I can't believe they put it on Surfcaster. It is just a crazy defensive layer, especially for bosses that aren't vaporizing instantly. Freezing them is very, very safe. You take Glacial Wave for the increased chill damage taken, 15% more damage essentially. And then of course, enemies are also dealing less damage. It's not wasted here. Now, Sea Legs is the big one. This lets you reclaim your chest piece back into a real chest. And then you also get crit cap basically for free because you're resistance stacking already on this armor stacker. And crit capping with a 5% base sword is very hard. So the nearly 600 or 700% crit chance you get here from the ascendancy, it's 429 here, is going to be invaluable in getting your crit cap here. It starts as a shadow, but the pathing is going to look very similar to what a Marauder clicks here. It's just kind of starting at pathing at shadow. It has Supreme Ostentation here to fix your attribute problems. This build has really bad attribute problems in my opinion, and this basically just fixes all of your issues. In duo and trio, you crucially are not going to be running Sap of the Season, so you do need a little bit of investment into penetration and inversion that you wouldn't have in 4-man or 5-man where a Druggery support exists. So extra investment here into pen. You also take the inversion mastery here. You also do a little bit with exposure here, and your tincture is also helping with your pen situation here. When you're in ranger here, you're equipping a light of meaning with armor. You can also use evasion instead. There's a ton of good nodes here to click, including the suppression. This is giving you a ton of armor. Starting at 5 million with this early endgame POB, you take this off, you know, it's about 20% of your armor, 15% or something like that. Very good jewel for the socket. You want frenzy charge generation on this build. The mastery is going to be probably one of the easiest places to get it here, besides maybe like Blood Rage. And then the pathing on trio from there coming down to the duelist area is going to basically look identical to what the armor stacker is on Marauder. The one small adjustment here is you do want to take this full wheel here for Disciple of the Unyielding and then get the 100% increased charge duration. This is very convenient when paired with the chest piece here to get the endurance charge every 15 seconds. This gives you a 100% uptime on these endurance charges if you're not on a minus buff duration map. This, however, is not necessary if you are in a trio where a Crybot is giving you all of your endurance charges. The rest of the tree here, pretty straightforward. You're grabbing armor nodes, you're grabbing armor nodes here, life, rage, it's all of the stuff you're grabbing on a normal armor stacker. As for the gearing, the interesting thing here is of course going to be the chest piece, because on a 3-man or duo, you're going to be playing Surfcaster, which means you get to reclaim your chest piece. The best thing, of course, is to make a Giga Evasion chest with as much resistances on the suffixes as possible. You have double T1 suffixes for fire and cold res. You can even put lightning res on here for extra crit chance if you need it. Prefixes just increase evasion, increase evasion. As for the implicits, of course, you want the endurance charges, as I mentioned before, and this is a really convenient spot to get Fortify. You can also tattoo Fortify on the strength nodes here if you want a little bit of extra chance if you feel like it's inconsistent. The other swap you're making here for duos and trios on the gloves is you're using an Admiral's Arrogance. You're not constrained to using Southbound, and Admiral's Arrogance helps a ton with your rage ramp. It just shoots you up to full all the time, and it means that while you're bouncing in between packs, your rage drops a little bit, it'll shoot you right back up to full. It's a very, very, very good and potent glove piece here. It's also a pretty good corruption target to help with your sword base crit on the Dream Feather. 0.54 implicit here is going to help a ton when your base crit's 5% here. Boots, you just want some action speed. You want as much life as you can. Carry does have to build rarity here, so a rarity affix here is also very important. Movement speed and resistances is giving you increased armor as well. Same technology is going on here with Untouched Soul. This is where a bunch of your resistances is coming from, which is translating to a bunch of crit chance, a bunch of evasion, a bunch of armor from the helmet, and then the ascendancy. It's very, very good. Your rings are going to be a mix of stats that you need, like, you know, you want life, you want rarity, you want as much life and rarity on the other rings as well. Chaos res if you can get it. It's going to be a little bit hard to fix chaos res on this build. You might have to sack your chaos res here because the rings on here are probably going to be a little bit too good than what you can afford. Last but not least, it's going to be a micro distillery belt. You of course put a tincture in the last slot, and your other 4 flasks are benefiting from the flask effect. Your flask, you desperately need chaos res on this build, so an amethyst is pretty necessary here. You can maybe replace this with an Itziri's Promise, but I think just a blue flask here with rainbow suffixes is very important because suffixes do a lot for your armor stacker as well. Basalt Stibnite, because you just are stacking armor. These are 2 good flasks for armor. The Jade Flask is missing here because we are going to be receiving a Jade Flask from an Aurabot. The Gold Flask here has an Enkindling Orb on it because when you're clearing Rogue Exiles or Pandemonium maps, you aren't clicking your Gold Flask unless you're killing an Exile or a boss. So you're not clicking the Gold Flask until the unique mob is about to die. When you click your flask, you receive that injection of rarity. It's not worth pushing this Gold Flask on all of the other trash like rare mobs and blue and white mobs. They just don't drop shit, to be honest. And then as I mentioned before, the Rose Thorn Tinctures is helping a lot with your penetration and also your crit chance. You don't have a ton of stuff in links here because you are using Untouched Soul. You got your 6-link Lightning Strike. You have Blood Rage Ass Mark on hit with a Purity of Elements here. You want to fit Pet Blood somewhere where there's not a white socket. You can put this in the boots, and then if you 3 white socket it, right, with Blanchings, it's going to be pretty easy to get this. And then you need a movement skill somewhere. You can use Flame Dash, you can use Leap Slam, but I think without the Aurabot, your attack rate here is going to be a 4.41. I think it's going to be fine just to use Leap Slam here. It's probably going to feel the best. That's it for the 3-man carry. Let's move on to the Aurabot here. This Aurabot is going to look very similar to a 6-man Aurabot, but there are a few crucial adjustments. On 6-man Aurabot, you're just clicking Aura Effect on the small nodes, but on 2 and 3-man Aurabots, you actually do click Ascendancy nodes here. So these are the 4 that we've gone with. Light of Divinity, Absolution, Field Medicine, and the small nodes. Last but not least, we have taken a level 30 Grace. I just added it to the belt here because it doesn't work if you put it in the config. So this is your last Ascendancy point with a level 30 Grace. The level 30 Grace is good here because it's tough to hit level 30 Grace unless you're using March of the Legion. March of the Legion is like super cringe in duos and trios. It's just way too hard to get working. And so the next best place to get levels is actually going to be from the level 30 Grace from the Ascendancy. You also can't use Valkyries because you really want to use Hands of Phrecia for that juicy 40 aura effect. The other nodes here, you're just getting the 40 aura effect from Link, 25 ink damage, and then of course, you get the utility flask applied to linked targets. Because you're not using March of the Legion, you're rotating over to Bubonics, and then you're also putting on Hands of Phrecia for the extra aura effect. The extra RMR from Bubonics lets you put another aura on reservation here, which is Grace. Instead of using it on a blessing, you just get more RMR in order to reserve it permanently, but it's at a much less aura effect than you have if you were doing like double blessing tech. The main adjustment you're doing here is you're dropping the blessing in duo and trio, and you're putting on Bubonics so that you can reserve Grace permanently. The gearing here for the duo Aurabot is going to be basically identical to the 6-man with the swap of the gloves and the boots. You're still juicing Grace as much as you can via the rings and the String of Servitude and the Amulet Corrupt if possible. And then of course your flask setup is switching because you're no longer using the Lavianja's meme. But you still have all of the Aegis defenses here, 700k armor with all that recovery, and you're of course using Protective Link. You're going to do a little bit of link investment on the tree here. You take the movement speed so that you can, run as fast as your carry, and you're giving them your 75 attack block while you're at it. And importantly, you are still throwing mines if you need that little bit of extra damage. And last but not least, we need to talk about the Crybot hybrid that you can play in 3-man here. Now, this fuses together Pyroclast mines and Crybot buffs into one character on an ancestral commander. As we've said before, this node here, 50% fizz taken as, is just crazy. This ascendancy also benefits you with the +3 maximum endurance charges, which is really good. We're sharing it all with on boost charge, so this is very welcome here. You have Defiance for your personal defenses, and of course you just take the Jug node as the last node here. Same exact pathing as you would with a duelist here, except for you're just on Marauder. You come out here and connect up here at the start. You do need a little bit of investment into Mine Effect here in order to cap out your Pyroclast. On this character, you have a 5,000 Pyroclast setup here, as well as 11 endurance charges, and of course all of the crazy buffs that the War Cries give you here. One thing to note here is that because you no longer have a shield slot to get a bunch of ES, you need to be very careful about how you are balancing your life and energy shield in order to proc Vengeful Cry. It is very, very important and one of the biggest damage steroids you can get if you proc the Forbidden Rite into the Vengeful Cry, so you might need to do a little bit of additional investment on the tree to rebalance your energy shield and life so that you can actually proc the Vengeful Cry. Other than that, nothing here too groundbreaking. It's just fusing together two builds that already exist, which is the Miner support and then the Crybot buffs all built into one character, so that we have a grand total of 75% fizz taken as. With the Calm's Binding, it really helps your fizz mitigation issue. You have 90% LA overcap. You should be very, very safe with these builds, and it gives you the huge damage bonus of all of the mines and the Cries buffs as well. So that goes over all of the variants of 6-man, 3-man, 2-man. The last thing we need to talk about is kind of some suggestions for 4-man or 5-man. Your builds in 4 and 5-man are going to look identical to what we're playing in 6-man. You're just basically cutting a character here. The best 4th character to play is probably going to be a Culler here, because if you have a properly built Crybot, you don't need extra defenses, and adding all that extra rarity is going to drop you more loot, so it probably makes sense to add that as the next best thing. After that, the next support you'd probably add is going to be the Druggery support for your 5th. Just know that this has heavy reliance on you being able to buy Master Surgeons, so your cost to get your party running is going to be a lot higher because it is enabled by a Forbidden Flesh and Flame. If you don't want to go down that route and you don't want to compete for Forbidden Flesh and Flame jewels, the next best thing, of course, is the Gluttonybot. This is going to give you basically complete immortality with a sliver of downtime. With all of your fizz taken as on the Crybot and the Culler, you're going to have 75% fizz taken as fire. The Gluttony is going to go a long way of making your party immortal, so going a Gluttonybot is going to be very, very good in 5-man as well. The last thing we need to talk about is what all of our leveling plans are and how we are going to level and transition all of these builds. I have prepped a few leveling trees and, leveling POBs that I can go over quickly here now, but as I mentioned in this video 3 years ago, the basics to leveling in a party is to play a different build on the first and second day, which is a very powerful meta starter, and then when you accumulate a little bit of gear, you can swap over after about like a day of farming to actual true group builds, because it is very difficult to actually start and finish on group builds, especially in 6-man. It's generally more efficient to start on another meta build that's stronger and then respec later, especially with respects being able to be used with gold. But starting off on Aurabot leveling, if you're leveling as a Paladin, you're most likely going to be playing Peaconk. I'm going to be following Jungroad's Peaconk Slayer guide here for the early levels. You can play this well into like the 60s and 70s before you do an early life-based Aurabot transition, but I personally like to switch earlier in the campaign, right around like mid-30s. If you're switching to Aurabot in the mid-30s, I have a tree here that you can follow along. You basically path up here to the mine stuff and the aura stuff that's early in champion. And after you complete your first lab, you're going to have an extra 45 aura effect from linking stuff, which is very potent. So I think that's right about when you can switch Aurabot and have it be viable. And then you can begin to build your life-based scuff Aurabot. As you're progressing your early Aurabot, a few very good uniques you're looking out for, of course, is going to be Trypanon. You link somebody with Destructive Link with this weapon, you give them 100% crit chance. They can equip a Maryland's Fallacy for a ton of crit multi, and it's just very, very easy to scale damage with this. Something that's also super nice is Broken Crown. It's just a ton of ES, gives you a lot of chaos res. It's also has a good amount of armor. It's a very, very good unique. Costs you 1C. It's very good to buy early. I personally love using Ghost Ride, the transition life-based Aurabots over to ES, because this converts all of your life to ES at a very good ratio, and it's a very good way to get chaos res early as well. Rest of your gear, you want Jinx Juju or effect if you can get it, and then just res life, rings, belts, whatever for your scuffed life-based Aurabot. The links are in here. You start off early with Stormblast Mine and your Flame Link, and then your 4-link auras. You switch eventually to Destructive Link when you get Trypanon, and then you replace Stormblast Mine with Pyroclast Mine Abuse as early on as you can. I'll put this in the description if you want to follow this like leveling POB, but once again, I would mostly, if you're learning how to level this, I would highly recommend following this Peaconk guide. This is what I'm going to be doing. I'm just playing Peaconk Duelist until I can transition to an early Aurabot. Next up, let's talk about carry leveling if you're on Behemoth here. Now, if you're on Behemoth, you're going to want to look at Alkaizer's guide here for how to level an early Marauder. It's a fantastic quick 5-minute guide you can watch if you want to learn how to level Marauder early. You can play Bone Shatter for a very long time, especially if you're being supported by an Aurabot. It's not going to be the most breathtaking, groundbreaking build, but it'll get the job done. We are, however, going to be trying something in 3-man, which is a little bit experimental, so I'm hesitant to recommend this kind of thing if you're leveling in a 3-man. But the concept here is that we're going to be using Bone Shatter leveling, for early campaign into like maybe level 50, level 60, and as soon as we're breaking into maps, we're going to be swapping to Rage Vortex of Berserking. Rage Vortex of Berserking is very OP for a few reasons. The first reason is hits have 250% more frequency, so it's like a 2.5 multiplier on your attack speed basically, and it can snapshot war cries like ambush and or intimidating and battle mage's cry and this kind of thing, anything that exerts attacks, so you can get double damage and more damage on rallying cry for free basically. And if you know anything about Crybots these days, the name of the game is just abusing Vengeful Cry for that juicy plus 60 maximum rage here. You can use this with Vengeful Cry, give your carry 61 max rage, and then they can have a bunch of rage regen, and they can play Rage Vortex of Berserking as soon as you get the Vengeful Cry Berserking setup going here. The problem with using Rage Vortex early is the rage regen and recharge, right? That's just the main bottleneck of keeping this skill going, but if you're abusing Vengeful Cry on a support in a 3-man, this makes the skill very, very viable early. So starting around level 60, maybe a little bit later, as soon as we get to the Calm's Primacy, which gives us rage, 1 physical for every extra rage to fire, it's very, very good because we're going to have like 100 rage here. It's an extra 100 fizz as fire. We're going to be linking him with Destructive Link with the Marylands. He's going to run around with Rage Vortex of Berserking. It should be a very, very good early progression build. There are progression trees here if you want to try and follow what we're doing, but I am once again hesitant to recommend this if you're doing this in like a smaller party. If you want to be safe, I would just recommend going Bone Shatter through and through, starting at level 1 and go all the way to like level 90, whatever, until you have enough money to do your armor stacker transition. But I'll leave this leveling POB here if you would want to do it. Next up is going to be leveling the Crybot. We are going to be playing a Paladin starting, early on, and we are going to be playing Frostblades of Catabasis, as long as you can use it. The leveling tree is here. Here is some Rue and Tai trees. We're just playing Frostblades. It's nothing crazy. We're going Duelist, but you're on a Paladin instead of a Slayer. The build still works. It's a pretty okay solid leveling tree for Duelist, and it's not the greatest single target, but if you're abusing snapshotting in a party, it doesn't really matter. All you need to do is keep up an XP. You can transition this to a Crybot. All you need to do is click the Warcry nodes in this area and slowly unspec all the damage nodes that you grabbed while leveling. The best time to do this is probably like late 50s when you're, maybe just about to finish the campaign. Your guy can go over to a Crybot and proc Vengeful Cry for the carry, and Vengeful Cry and the other war cries will just carry your damage. It's very, very potent. Next up, leveling the Gluttony character here. I would recommend looking into other POBs. Obviously, this character doesn't have a progression tree as a support, so you are respecing to this character when you're well into the 90s and you're going to be playing in a group, but But for early progression, the Gluttony character is most likely going to look to be going an Archmage build on Templar. Early on, you're doing classic rolling magma into Arma Crema, and then you're going to be playing either Ball Lightning of Orbiting with Archmage or Frostbolt. I would recommend looking at Havoc's Armageddon brand cremation guide here, which we'll also link in the description if you're unfamiliar with the basics of Templar leveling, but you can transition this into a Ball Lightning of Orbiting character or a Frostbolt Archmage for your early map progression, and then you're just respecting to a support when your Atlas is done. Last two real quick are Culler, which is of course a Marauder, is just going to be playing pure Bone Shatter starting from, you know, like level 28 after he does some Ground Slam, and then he's going to be playing Bone Shatter the entire way through all the campaign, all of the endgame progression until we can group. There's tons of resources on Bone Shatter. I'm not the most well-equipped person to tell you how to play that. Please look out other Bone Shatter guides if you're looking how to progress this character. Last but not least, the Druggery guy here. You kind of have two options. You can play Power Siphon Mines. That's option one. That is also a very well-explored build that I'm sure you can look up for other content creators. Option two is going to be playing a Hex Blast Trickster build, but instead of a Trickster, you're just on Ranger. It's the same exact amount of pathing points, and the best ascendancy to play this on early would of course be the Daughter of Oshabi node, and you just click the shrines. It's just a little bit of extra power, a little bit of extra movement speed. It can also help your pseudo-res and movement speed early in the campaign. That's how we're leveling all of the 6-man builds at the moment. And then real quick, talking about leveling the 3-man or duo version of this build, I would highly recommend if you're starting Shadow Surfcaster, Power Siphon Mines is going to be one of the safest things that you can play here. It's a very long video by Jungron about going all over this build. I think it's a very safe starter that you can do to go and clear the Atlas and get some gear together so that you can actually fund your group builds. However, feel free to play any Surfcaster build. It's a very popular ascendancy. You can play kind of any starter you want while you obtain a little bit of gear so that you can actually play the proper group builds. All right, guys, that should go over all of the builds, all of the leveling, all of that kind of stuff. I want to do a few shout outs here. I want to shout out ItsFineOkay on Halo's Discord. He's been putting together this spreadsheet here. This guy, ItsFineOkay. He's collected a lot of the group builds people are making, some different variants of all of these builds that you can kind of look at, and it's collected all here in a spreadsheet, which I linked in the description, so you can kind of sift through all of the different options you might want to play if you're doing a group build. Also want to shout out all the people on my Discord that have helped tremendously with all these builds, especially like, you know, Reality, Randall, all those guys that have been helping me with all these builds. It's been super fun having all of these come together, and Bazooka Tank as well, of course. Thanks, guys, for helping with all of this stuff. This is a big info dump. There's a lot of info here. I try to answer as many questions as you guys might have in the comments. Anyways, we're excited about the event. Hope to see you guys there in POE1, not POE2. Cringe shit. Hashtag ASA fuck sanctum. Goodbye.